Warning, this episode contains mature themes and topics that may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewers' discretion is advised. Hello, guys and dolls. Welcome back to the show, Conversations with Zelia. I'm your host, Zelia Lorraine. Today is Saturday, May 24th, 2025. And in today's episode, I'll be reviewing the 1993 Renascer, a Brazilian novella created by Benedito Roy Barbosa, the creator of Pentanol, Terra Nostra, among other works. This novella tells the saga of Zé Nascencio, a cocoa farmer who is on bad terms with his sons, with the youngest one he's pretty much treats like crap due to him causing the death of his one great love, Maria Santa. And things get even more worse between father and son when a woman named Mariana enters the fold. Now, this review will be in two parts since Renascer is a very lengthy novella with 217 chapters in the original, and I'm only watching 127, and I'll review the rest, the other 90 in the second review. In this review, I'll discuss the main plot or what has happened so far, the side character, my thoughts about the characters in other plots, and also whether or not I'm going to watch the remake, which from what I've heard mixed reviews about the remake. And also, considering the fact I will discuss certain plot points in storylines, there will be spoilers, so beware. So let's jump right in. The story begins with a young man with a mysterious past named Zé Nascencio who cuts through the forest to declare his own manifesto in front of the Jequitiba tree, which he stabs a machete through the foot as a symbolism that he'll be immortal. And soon after that, he gets attacked by a bunch of bandits, brutally attacked with a bunch of bandits, until a mysterious traveler named Turco Rashid, who's actually Lebanese, comes to the rescue and pretty much treats his wounds by sewing his skin up. Then the next day, he and two of his companions, Diocleciano and Zeno Jubara, they wind up arriving at Elus, where he wants to start his farming empire at, and they meet Bellamino, the head honcho of the cocoa farms, and his wife Doña Nina. Then during a Bumblebee Boy celebration, and before I get into that, for those who don't know what a Bumblebee Boy is, it's a Brazilian folkloric dance that tells a story of an ox that dies and winds up coming back to life, essentially. And during the dance, Zé Nascencio becomes attracted to Maria Santa, the daughter of Bellamino's worker, Boy Venancio. And Boy Venancio recognizes this and pretty much attacks Zé Nascencio for looking at his daughter. But that doesn't stop Zé Nascencio from pursuing Maria Santa, the next time he confronts her, he winds up kissing her, which leads to Maria Santa, who's super naive to think that she got pregnant by kissing, but then again, she was raised naive. And for a little bit of backstory on Maria Santa and her family pretty much raised her overprotectively and sheltered due to her older sister, Maria Nina, getting pregnant and being kicked out of the house, which we only learn the details of. We won't find out about Maria Nina till later on. And when Maria Santa tells her parents what happened, her Boy Venancio and her mother Quateria wind up dropping her off at Jacatinga's brothel, where Jacatinga takes her in and pretty much raises her as her own. Bellamino takes advantage of this to try to pretty much mac at Maria Santa, though her heart is with Zainazenso, leading to Bellamino trying to have Zainazenso killed. It were led to believe that Zainazenso died, but he actually faked his death just to trick Bellamino. As Zainazenso winds up visiting the brothel to pretty much propose to Maria Santa. In his workers, but Diocleciano and Zeno Juparo do wind up falling in love with the other girls at the brothel, namely Diocleciano with Marina and Zeno with Flor. Then, while he's pretty much declaring his love for Marissa and proposing her, Bellamino gets mysteriously murked by a mysterious shooter who we don't find out. We don't find out about the shooter, though it's hinted that it could be Zay DeCentio. Then Zay DeCentio visits Doña Nina and her granddaughter, who will be very important later on. It pretty much assures Doña Nina that he had no part in Bellamino's death and promises to take care of them, because when Bellamino dies, he pretty much takes over his assets essentially and marries Maria Santa. So yeah, he must then a few time jumps then during a montage after she gives birth to Zay Gusto, the eldest of the four sons. There's a montage of happy times of her welcoming two more children, Zay Bento and Zay Venancio, named after her dad. Then she's expecting. Then the montage ends with her expecting a fourth child. I mean, with Marina and Flora being married to their respective men. Then during delivery of the fourth child, Maria Santa has complications as she pretty much passes away. But the fourth child she was giving birth to, João Pedro, winds up surviving, much to the chagrin of Zainacenso, who pretty much curses out the baby, which is the hardest scene to watch. Like, the baby had no control over his mom dying, and his mom died to keep him alive. And he very much gives João Pedro away to Diocleciano and Marina, who wind up raising him, with Marina feeding him her own milk, because Marina was pregnant with a child that she wound up losing. And João Pedro grows up working in his father's farm at a young age alongside Diocleciano, and when he winds up recalling his dad's actions at the Jicatebetiri, which he winds up visiting, and Zayna says she chastises for that. Then we cut to a time jump where the little boy transitions to Marcos Palmera, who's on his way to Jacatinga's brothel, where they're all chatting with Jacatinga. A girl winds up arriving at the brothel, which catches João Pedro's attention. The girl, whose name is Mariana, played by Adriana Estevez, gets taken in by João Pedro, who takes him to his father, Zainacencio, a bitter, widowed loner, now played by Antonio Fagundes. João Pedro is pretty much the only one of Zainacencio's Trojas farm, since his older brothers, who, unlike him, were well-educated, sent to better schools, are based in the city and have problems of their own. Zay Bento is a lawyer who's in a situationship-esque marriage with a woman named Kika, who's struggling as a lawyer. Then Zay Augusto is a doctor who Zeno, Flora and Jabara's child, resents for causing his father's death. It winds up questioning his own abilities after causing the death of a little girl. And Zay Venancio is an engineer who's in a horrible marriage with a woman named Ileana, who's your typical bitchy woman. We're introduced to Zay Venancio. He's out in the club with a woman named Booba, who is an intersex woman. one of the few portrayals of intersexuality on television. And when he gets back home to Ileana staged her own death by pouring ketchup on herself. And there's an argument between them in which Ileana pretty much emasculates him and treats him like crap, bringing up how he can't have children, all of that other stuff. And speaking of children, Zane Asensio, who's pretty much a bitter, lonely widower, wants to have a grandchild, which he tells this to his sons. And Zavananto, who winds up leaving Ileana for Booba, pretty much tells Booba this, which leads to Booba to go to an agency using Ileana's name since her real name is a CG's, and winds up adopting a teen girl named Teresa Christina, or Tekka for short. Tekka is a teen street child who was impregnated by a man named Joe, who's a few years older than her, who were led to believe is dead from confronting someone that tried to assault her. And Booba takes Tekka into her home, which isn't just to put the intention of adopting her child, which Say Venancio doesn't accept. Back at the farm, Mariana arrives at Zay and Anastasio's farm and pretty much reveals that she is the granddaughter of Bellamino. But to the shock of Zay and Anastasio, who tells her that he didn't have nothing to do with what happened to her grandfather. And her revenge for her grandfather's death, that's pretty much her main storyline. João Pedro was in love with Mariana, but Mariana pretty much chooses to be with his dad and pretty much seduces Zane Asensio, who decides to wife her, inviting Venancio and Bento and Augusto to attend the wedding, while Venancio and Bento appear with Kika and Booba respectively. Augusto doesn't show up till a few days afterwards. And the wedding winds up happening much to the chagrin of João Pedro, who's pretty much super emotional about it, which I don't blame him. Imagine falling for a girl and your dad takes your girl, essentially. And João Pedro pretty much has to deal with the love of his life being his stepmom and the horror of seeing your stepmother stay with your dad in the cocoa farm, which has to be traumatizing. Hope comes in the form of Professor Rena Lou, a teacher hired by Zane Asensio to teach the children of the cocoa farmers. Professor Rena Lou pretty much, in her own way, educates João Pedro by giving him books by Jorge Amado, a well-known Brazilian author, to read, since Zane Asensio never bothered to give João Pedro an education. That's how much Zane Asensio hated his own son. He didn't even give him an education like his other three brothers. Then in the main house, Inacia, Zane Asensio's longtime maid, pretty much doesn't treat Mariana well the same way she treated Maria Santa, after treating her suspiciously, which makes sense considering that Mariana is Bellamino's granddaughter. And Inacia often, I'm sorry saying Inacia may be a long-time gossip, seeing as that she knows all the tea in regards to Bellamino's and Maria Santa's families, which will become important later on. And then there's Retina, who also works as a servant for Inocencio's and Dicleciano and Marina's families, which consist of Zeno and João Pedro, who falls for Damiel, a thug with a mysterious past, who winds up marrying her, even though fellow Chico, played by her dad, played by Grandi Otello, who died not long after, a few months after doing this part, who winds up dying shortly before Damiel and Retina marry. And we're introduced to Zane Asensio's main op, Teodoro, who lives with his wife, Ailanda, aka Doña Petroya, and they take in a family that Padre Levo found on the street while driving They mainly consist of a man named TL, his young wife Joanna or Joanina, and their two children. And they're pretty much hired to work for Teodoro's farm. Teodoro is also introduced as a slime ball since he spends most of his time trying to mac on Joanina to no avail, while TL Galena pretty much gets obsessed with a black chicken in hopes that it would give him good luck, like Xanacencio's devil in the bottle. Then meanwhile in the city, Ileana pretty much hires a private investigator, Alberto, to find dirt on Booba. Finds out that Booba's real name is CG, making the assumption that she's a transgender when in actuality she's intersex. In fact, Booba and Venacio's argument winds up leading Tekka to run away into Ileana of all people. And when she's discovered, she has a broken leg. And Booba does tell Tekka the truth in regards to her intersexuality. In which the one thing I didn't like on here was how they treat intersexuality as akin to being transgender, which are two different things. And for those wondering what intersexuality or intersex person is pretty much a person that was born with characteristics of both genders. Back in the past, they were called hermaphrodites. Back in the past. And Booba is one of the few representations of intersex people in media in general. Which is why I was sort of upset that they made that Booba became trans in the remake, because that was a big missed opportunity to discuss intersexuality in modern media, though they did make another character intersex, but I digress. And Kika winds up kicking Bento to the curb. And Bento, meanwhile, winds up devising a plan to have his father divide the lands between them since he can't trust Mariana, which winds up causing Zay Gusto to finally arrive. And João Pedro winds up buying out Zay Gusto's share, which winds up angering Zay Inocencio. So that's that. Then we're led to believe that Professor and Lou and João Pedro will become a couple. But that's thrown out the window when Sandra arrives. Sandra, who's apparently winds up coming back to her parents' farm after studying in Salvador. Which Sandra has a boyfriend that she hasn't been involved with, which winds up leading to Teodoro pretty much shaming his daughter. Then Sandra winds up bumping into João Pedro while riding her horse. And they start to connect until Sandra reveals that she's Teodoro's daughter, which João Pedro winds up rejecting her, winds up leaving her behind. And Sandra, who's been away for Salvador for so long, is pretty much oblivious to the whole conflict and winds up visiting Zay in Inocencio's house. Is Zay accompanied by Mariana? They pretty much treat her with disdain due to her connection. And in spite of Sandra being Teodoro's daughter, João Pedro winds up falling in love with her, much to the chagrin of his family, who winds up scaring Sandra away. Then Sandra gets kicked out by Teodoro, which leads to her leaving for Salvador. But before she leaves for Salvador, she winds up chatting with Roberto, the local shop man who's been feeling lonely since Jagatinga's departure. Who has a bar where the characters sit and chat at. She asks him about the brothel, in which pretty much Roberto tells her that the brothel is up for sale. She winds up traveling to Salvador. Then, meanwhile, Tekka's mischievous friends Nino and Pitoko come around to the apartment, often eating the food there. And Nino and Pitoko, like Tekka, are street children as well. And when Booba finds out about this, she pretty much allows them to eat at her apartment, much to Venacio's chagrin. And Venacio winds up having pretty much gained some bravery to divorce Ileana. Ileana, who winds up becoming butthurt at this. And Ileana winds up finding out from Kika about her father-in-law when she winds up traveling to Ilius behind Venacio's back. Then Turco Rashid winds up arriving, and we wind up with which pleases Zayn Asensio, who's happy to reunite with the person that pretty much saved his skin, literally. And Ignacio babbles about the connection between Turco Rashid and Marinina. Come to find out, Turco Rashid and Marinina got married. And they had several children together, though Marinina has since passed away. And Turco Rashid has a letter that Marinina wrote for Maria Santa that he refuses to give to Zayn Asensio because the letter is for Maria Santa. And and we'll probably find out the contents of this letter in part 2 of my review. Though I should know that Alberto has possession of this letter. Back at Ilius, Iliana, she winds up arriving and she winds up falling for Dabial, who's married to Retina and has an affair with him. While Mariana tries to seduce João Pedro, who pretty much rejects her, unsurprisingly, when she and Zayn Asensio had it out, which is top tier manipulation. And while at Robert's back at Elu's, Venancio winds up telling Bento about Booba, which is then cut with Booba telling Tekka about her intersexuality. And Ileana winds up telling Zayn and Santio truths and untruths about Booba, namely labeling Booba as a transgender woman or a transvesti, which alerts Zayn senses with suspicion, which causes them to travel to the city to visit Booba and Venancio, with Booba wearing a fake pregnancy belly. While Tekka, who's been dreaming of cocoa farms and wants to be Zayn Asensio due to the portrait of Venancio's wall, wants to travel to Ilius. Venancio decides to go back to Ilius to pretty much divorce Ileana. While Sandra, by this point, has purchased a brothel and moves in to live there, with João Pedro visiting her. And during João Pedro's visit, Sandra, her father Teodoro, who doesn't improve the romance, pops up and winds up probably would have popped João Pedro if it wasn't for Damiel arriving in time. This causes Teodoro to get revenge and leads to a tragic situation. While João Pedro is driving and Zayn and Venancio are going on a ride, pretty much reliving past memories, a mysterious sniper winds up shooting a bunch of shots, which winds up killing Venancio. And it does take rocket science to see who the culprit was, since Teodoro winds up celebrating Venancio's death. And pretty much the entire family's in mourning, with Augusto being sent by his father to the city to tell Booba the news, while Bento contacts Kika to tell Ileana, who's her roommate, the news. And Ileana winds up visiting Booba to pretty much tell her off in so many ways, being the bitchy mean girl she is, and winds up labeling Booba. And Booba is Augusto. They wind up coming up with a plan to introduce to take Tekka to the farm, pretty much by making it seem as though Tekka was the one that got impregnated by Zayn Venancio, even though Zayn Venancio was sterile. And it pretty much works, and Ileana is kicked out of the farm. It moves into Sandra's brothel, where she and Turco Rashid are living, and they wind up developing a close friendship. And the three of them winds up developing a close friendship, with Turco even confiding to Sandra about that the first child Marianina had, they abandoned at the doorstep. Then meanwhile, with the Tia Galena line, Tia Galena becomes big mad that Zayn Asensio lied to him about the good luck charm, that he winds up visiting Zenessential's farm armed, and conveniently, his chicken winds up hatching, pretty much releasing an egg, which he winds up becoming full of joy with, and winds up accidentally smashes the egg, and he's right back to normal. But there's still marital tensions with Joe and Nina, with Joe and Nina showing interest in Teodoro, which leads to Janina and Tiagalina and Donna and Linda leaving Teodoro's house and living at the brothel, which Sandra winds up converting it to a one-off foro dance spot, which is attended by Marina and Diocletiano and the townspeople. And as you can tell, I really do not care too much for Tia Digalina's storyline. It just comes across as weird to me. And Zay Augusto, back in the 80s, Zay Augusto winds up telling Zane and Cincio about Booba's intersexuality. And Booba and Tekka winds up moving into Zane and Cincio's house, much to the chagrin of Mariana, who's jealous of the affection he showers towards Tekka, which he starts to develop a bond with. Then when Booba and Zay Augusto goes away for Booba's surgery, Inacio winds up keeping Booba company, and Tekka. I keep getting these characters' names incorrect. Tekka company, which causes Tekka to become wary of Inacia when Inacia says that pretty much indirectly tells the truth about the bio father of her baby due being black, which causes Tekka to want the baby to be born white. So, I'm going to give away the fact that that the bio father was black, since it will give away that Venancio is the father, essentially. Then Sandra, who has turned out to be pregnant, winds up telling João Pedro the news, which causes João Pedro to marry her. And the Inocencios, on the other hand, they're very upset about this, with Inocencio Mariana referring to her as a kinga, which is the Brazilian equivalent of a thought, and claiming that the baby may not be João Pedro's because of her having a boyfriend a few months earlier. Like, they never show us how much time has passed in this novella. And Mariana essentially shows jealousy, which what is it with these women, man? They reject someone, but all of a sudden want them when they moved on. Like, I swear, man. And Ileana, since she's back used, winds up continuing her affair with Damiao, which Retina becomes suspicious of. And Bento tries to put the moves on Professor Lou, by the way, even painting the schoolhouse for her. And João Pedro and Sandra, they wind up getting married at the brothel, reminiscent of Zay Inocencio's marriage to Maria Santa, which Zay Inocencio reluctantly attends. And not only that, but he refused to shake his son's hand. But Marina and Diocletiano are João Pedro's real parents, in my honest opinion. Diocletiano, on the other hand, congratulates and welcomes Sandra to the family. And even worse, Zay Inocencio doesn't claim Sandra and João Pedro's unborn child as his grandchild, which is a messed up thing to do. But as well, though, into my final thoughts, there is a lot of generational cycle within this family. But Ileana winds up finally winning over Damiao and decides to take him back to Sao Paulo. But Damiao, who spent most of his life in the countryside, has a hard time adjusting to the city, which results in him moving back, which upsets Ileana, and is now alone in the city since Kika, who winds up hooking up with Roberto, have gone their separate ways. So she decides to move back to the brothel to get herself a rich farm-in, and that rich farm-in is Teodoro, the guy that probably or completely murked her her husband, which that's typical odd behavior. Dandino Batuco, Tekka's best friends from the streets, wind up visiting Booba's house to tell him that Du was alive but is in jail, and wind up following Tech. They wind up following Tekka to Luz, where they get picked up by the priest, who takes them to Zane Asensio's farm, where they're hired as cocoa workers. And Zane Asensio winds up kicking him out, and they want to live with Marino Discipliniano after taking Tekka out. And Tekka, who's starting to have weird visions when visiting the house where Maria Santa and her family lived. Through these Gothica-like visions that we find out more about Marianina's past. Marianina was pretty much, not only was she abused by her father, Boy Venancio, but she was probably subjected to SA by Bellamino, which led to her getting pregnant. And Venancio winds up visiting the old house as well and gets visions of Quateria, Marianina, and Maria Santa's mother. And all of this culminates in Tekka trying to run away from the farm. And the next time we see her, she has given birth to a son named Zanacencio Filo, named after Zanacencio, whose skin winds up initially, when born, was initially light, but winds up darkened. And Zanacencio winds up hand waving the baby's skin complexion as by bringing up their ancestry and how Maria Santa being half indigenous and stating Jao Pedro's skin is darker because of the sun. Even though with that claim, but that was the case, they would, when the Asensio boys are shown as children, they look caboclo or have looked like they have indigenous ancestry, but when they're adults, they're played by white actors. But make it make sense. As Zane Asensio gets a visit from Maria Santa, which often occasionally happens, he pretty much tells her to pretty much remove the saint figure in the house, which winds up happening in a big ceremony that pretty much takes up the entire episode. Then afterwards, Inacio has a chat with Tekka, which reveals that Tekka is not only related to Marinina, but is also cousins with Mariana, which shocks Tekka. Not to mention, Pastor Levro, the priest dude, is starting to have a existential crisis, which results in him giving up his vocation of being a priest. Not to mention, Morena gets told by Nasia that that Pinocchio and Nino may be a reincarnation of her deceased baby, which pretty much cheers Inacio, and she starts treating. And that ends the recap of Renascer so far. My final thoughts are, I'm enjoying Renascer so far. One of the complaints about Renascer is that it's slow, which, don't get me wrong, is slow, but the slow pacing is what works within the story. And I can see why in the remake they expanded the first phase, since the first phase was only 4 episodes long. I thought by Zane Asensio. Zane Asensio is starting to come across as the villain to me for the way he treats Jao Pedro, despite the fact how his 3 eldest sorry-ass sons turned out. One is an engineer married to an unmotivated woman. Another one is a lawyer who pretends to be rich. And then the third son is a doctor who can't even do his own freaking job. He has all this energy out for Jao Pedro, but not his 3 other sons, aside from him forcing them to smash Coco, and reaming them. They pretty much grew up with a silver spoon while getting a good education, and were living in a big city, while his youngest son got treated like dirt, all because his mom died giving birth to him. And then the fact that he was willing to acknowledge a a grandchild that wasn't biologically related to him, and often passing off the grandchild's dark skin as part of his ancestry, while not acknowledging João Pedro's future child due to the mother being the daughter of his op. That's slimeball behavior. Teodoro, Herxon Capri did a good job playing Teodoro. He's your typical slimeball villain. And he just gives you the creeps in every scene he's in. My favorite characters so far are Professor Rena Lou, who's pretty much acting like a therapist to the family, Marina and Daisy Clignano for pretty much being good parents to João Pedro, being more of a better parent than Zane Asensio, Sandra for pretty much being, in so many ways, saving João Pedro from his misery, Booba for pretty much being a very sympathetic character. And even though there are obvious flaws, for being one of the few sympathetic portrayals of a intersex person in media ever. And Tekka. And I also enjoyed the reincarnation theme, which makes sense considering the fact Renascer is rebirth in Portuguese, namely regards to Tekka being a reincarnated version of Maria Santa, which makes sense because she's related to her. Then Pitoko and Nino being a reincarnated version, probably being reincarnated versions of Marina and Discana's dead deceased child. And I really enjoyed how they wrote the reincarnation theme. And another thing to discuss with the novella so far is the generational trauma and generational cycle. Zane Asensio, I wonder what the heck happened in Zane Asensio's upbringing, which I know, and I doubt we're gonna get some intel on Zane Asensio's upbringing. But the treatment of his son screamed generational trauma, seeing as that all four of his children, they're all screwed up in some way. His eldest, Augusto, is a failed doctor who has caused the deaths of some of his patients, including Zeno's father, Zeno Jabara. The Zave Bento is pretty much your typical scumbag that, despite having a silver spoon, pretty much wants to keep up with the Joneses. Then Venancio is an engineer who chose an emotionally unstable woman to be married to. And João Pedro, who was pretty much adopted by the couple that worked for his father, was never received an education like his siblings, and pretty much worked on the cocoa farm since he was a child, all because his mom dying giving birth to him. And then with Maria Santa's side of the family, Boy Venancio was pretty much abusive to his daughters. One who he beat it so bad she walks with a limp, and another who he abandoned for getting kissed. Considering what we know about Bellamino, and I hate to say this, but Bellamino pretty much deserved to get popped, seeing as how he pretty much raped Marianina and tried to do the same thing to Maria Santa. And Mariana still holds this man in high regard due to her grandmother. I will come out with a second part once I conclude watching, where I will be able to discuss more things and the other themes very well. And another thing I forget to mention in my final thoughts is the soundtrack. I really enjoyed the soundtrack and the scenic views of Ilus watching this novella. That was the best. That's one of the best parts of the novella, the cinematography and the music. Like, I still have Luis Savarana in my head. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed my review of Renascer. The next episode for the show would be either discontinued childhood food items I miss, top 10 potential biopics, or a review of Just Cause, and then a Q&A video. So when I probably make post a comment about the Q&A video, be sure to leave the questions in the comment sections of my next recent video. It was nice talking to you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode, If you have more thoughts about what I discussed in the episode, be sure to leave them in the comment section. Like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. I'll see you until then. Goodbye.